I will not introduce the debate anymore, because Katka did it twice for me, and that will save me a few seconds for our discussion with Mr. Nikola Dimitrov, who is the Deputy Prime Minister for European Affairs of the Republic of North Macedonia. Welcome, Nikola.
Thank you so much, dear Tomáš. I hope that's a proper pronunciation. I would have preferred to be physically in Prague, and I was there not too long ago. So I'd like to thank Europeum for this invitation, and I'd like to send warm greetings virtually to another Tomáš, my previous colleague, the foreign minister.
All right. Well, Nikola, I know there are some important up-to-date topics that are connected to the events of from yesterday and from today, but I will keep them aside for the moment because I believe that in our later Q&A sessions, when people from the audience will have the opportunity to ask a few questions, they might come back to that. And I will rather prefer to focus on the original schedule, on more longer-term issues. So let me start by asking, when we look back at this year, at the pandemic of COVID-19, how would you say this crisis impacted the relationship between the European Union and Western Balkans?
Well, after an initially slow start, and I think it took a while for Europe to get its act together and come up with concrete actions and policies, I'm pleased to say that Europe made us feel as part of the family. And I think it's safely to say that we can say this on behalf of the whole region of the Western Balkans. I vividly remember the first weeks of COVID-19, of the pandemic, when we had Macedonian citizens stranded between borders, stuck at airports with cancelled flights. This initial rush to find ventilators and other relevant needed medical equipment. Europe was by far the most active friend of the region, initially offering medical equipment to all countries of the region, then millions of euros to mitigate the socio-economic consequences of the crisis. We, as North Macedonia, we had an initial 62 million euros on that, the socio-economic consequences, and then an additional 160 million euros in direct budget support. Then, what was previously not really accessible for us, but only for member states, the European Solidarity Fund, joint procurement procedures, the joint procurement agreement, the EU civil protection mechanism, all these became available, and we were able to establish a very good cooperation in this context, both on joint procurement of medicine, of using the services of the civil protection mechanism to put people on planes. We also helped citizens of EU member states to fly back home. And with the help of the Commission and the RCC, we established so-called green lanes. I remember calling fellow ministers in different capitals to ask for trucks to transport to continue unimpeded. This was, I think, solved with the establishment of these so-called green lanes. So, as with many other challenges today, the fight against terrorism, the challenge of migration, you all remember the Balkan route in 2015 and 16. Our region, because of its geography, we are a region that is encircled by member states, is very much part of the destiny of the European Union. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic only underscored this, that we are in this same boat, and that the more aligned our policies are with those of the European Union, better for us, and better for the member states of the European Union. So I think this difficult year, this joint challenge, renewed the sense of solidarity, both within the EU, but also between Europe and the Western Balkans. And it only underscores why it makes perfect sense, and there are so many reasons that the European perspective of this region has been reiterated so many times. Now, bear with me, we had a setback yesterday, but I will try, as you requested, to focus more on the long term.
Well, we'll come to the short term, to the up-to-date later, I'm sure about that. But maybe just like a short follow-up, did also the public opinion in North Macedonia on the European Union shifted a little bit as a consequence of the pandemic and the pandemic response, or was there not much of a move?
Europe is very popular in North Macedonia, and I think this is mostly for two reasons. It varies, it moves between plus 80% of the people, they support European integration. Sometimes it goes below, more towards 70%. I haven't seen very recent polls, but our public opinion is very much pro-European. And the reason for this is twofold. One, with the common market and can you hear me?
Yep, perfectly.
Yes. Okay, I'll continue. The reason for this popularity is twofold. One, people see hope for more prosperity.
I can hear you perfectly.
Yes, but I have the voices from the studio interfering. Yes, I can, but I'd like to go back to the moderator if possible.
All right. Well, Nikola, so can I pose you another question? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you, but the studio interfered. So let me make the point why Europe is popular. Hope for better prosperity, which comes from the common market, and over 3/4 of our trade is actually with the European Union, and over 3/4 of foreign direct investment also come with companies from EU member states. And second, EU is seen as a community of values. When you talk about Europe, and when you use the adjective European in North Macedonia, people think of normalcy, decency, rule of law, a functioning democracy, accountability of politicians and everyone else. So the second pillar is the magnet of the European Union as a community of values. And this second pillar is somewhat undermined with the recent developments and the lack of consensus for us to join, to start accepting.
Let me now ask you basically two questions that are very connected and that concern the future of the Western Balkans in the European Union. Basically, how can the Western Balkans, in your opinion, contribute to building of a stronger Europe? And the other question that is, as I said, very connected to it is how to fight the perception that a further enlargement of the European Union would lead to its further fragmentation and internal weakening.
Okay, I think this is a key question that we face often in European capitals, in Brussels. First of all, we have the geographic argument. We are a non-EU island surrounded by EU member states. And the more this non-EU island becomes European in terms of absorbing, transposing, adopting the European acquis, the standards, the European way of life, the more the policies of the region are aligned with policies of the European Union, both sides will be better off, the region and the European Union. In terms of security as well, the migration crisis showed clearly how integral the region of the Western Balkans is to Europe's security. In terms of economy, this region is an untapped potential. There is a development gap between the Western Balkans and the rest of Europe. And I think this also creates an opportunity for expanding the market and for economic development of the region. So I think it's quite simple. If we have a region of weak governance, there is a source of migration because we either move to Europe as countries, as a region, or people move to Europe individually, finding jobs and taking their families with them. We either have this region that creates challenges and problems, or we have a region with strong institutions, with European standards in line with the rest of the European Union. So I think what we need is a process that will transform our countries and make them more European. Now, in the light of what is taking place at the moment in these last couple of days in Brussels, in terms of the consensus on the 1.8 trillion of euros, the multi-annual financial framework, the relief fund for the pandemic, I think it is obvious that in the decision-making process of the Union, there can be improvement, to put that diplomatically. So, but I think these two processes are not confronting, but are rather compatible and complementary. Europe should face its own issues, and I think this is what we see. But at the same time, making the countries of the region, the whole region, more European goes very much hand in hand with the European project that is about stability, that is about peace, and that is about a European way of life. Democracy is governed by the rule of law. So I think we will see reforms, and I think this debate on the future of the European Union has in many ways already started. But at the same time, it will be a strategic mistake to forget or not to engage with this region that is geographically already part of the Union.
Thank you. You mentioned the recovery fund, the recovery plan. You mentioned the transformation of societies in a European way. There has been the topic of, or there is the topic of green and digital transformations that have been discussed a lot during today's Prague European Summit. And both the green and the digital lie at the core of Europe's recovery plan. I was wondering if also the national level in Western Balkans, in Northern Macedonia, count along or work along these priorities, and if the Western Balkan countries have enough capacities to comply with the European standards to move forward in these issues.
In the framework of the Berlin process, which is a process that was launched by the German Chancellor, Chancellor Merkel, we already have a very strong emphasis on regional cooperation, including cooperation with the Commission and with the European member states who are part of this initiative, on the digital agenda. And we have had digital summits in the region. One concrete deliverable has been the regional roaming agreement, making contacts between people in the region more affordable. And there is also a next step in the pipeline, which is to decrease the roaming prices between the region and the rest of Europe, with the countries of the EU. Digitalization is a huge opportunity for economic development. It is also a tool to fight corruption. It is also a tool to make public services for the citizens quicker, more efficient, and more affordable. So it's very much in what we plan and what we do at the moment. In many ways, the pandemic pushed us further to do things digitally, and I think the way we have this conversation is only one example in that direction, although I think a physical presence is still quite needed in many ways to discuss delicate issues, to overcome problems, to resolve issues. But also in terms of how we do governance at home, we have an e-government portal, a paperless government sessions, and we meet online most of the time these days, because it is also safer. We've been a candidate country for a long time, for 15 years. We are the first country that signed the Stabilization and Association Agreement in the region as back as 2001, 19 years. And in terms of our overall preparedness, we have a solid state of play. We're in a solid shape. We have administration that understands the process. We have an issue in keeping them where they are in terms of the competitiveness between the private market and the public sector. So what we need is a chance to show what we can do with reforms. And we got a green light this year in March with the support of the German presidency and virtually all member states but one at the moment. We want to start finally the accession process so that we can compete with others on a healthy competition, I think, on who does reform better, who digitalizes better their economy, where media are more free, who fights corruption more efficiently, and who adopts gradually the environmental directives. We need fresh air, both literally. Skopje is one of the more polluted cities in our region, but we also need fresh air metaphorically in terms of a tangible, realistic European perspective.
You mentioned the accession process, and you mentioned that one country, it's Bulgaria, has for now blocked it. That is the news of yesterday and today that we already touched upon. I was wondering, how do you see the chance that this accession process will still start during this year, during the German EU presidency, and what has to happen for it to start?
We are doing our best. We have an unconditional decision of all member states of the Council in March this year that we should start accession talks. And now we have issues that are between us and that goal. Now, it's very difficult to explain to the Macedonian citizens that one of the obstacles, the Macedonian language, which is my mother tongue, is an obstacle to our integration with a union that, according to the Lisbon Treaty, respects its cultural and linguistic diversity. And it is also difficult to understand how something that is very internal, that is at the heart of who we are, our identity, our sovereignty, should be an impediment to good neighborly relations based on mutual respect. So we are doing everything that we can. We are engaged with our neighbors from Sofia to find a way out of this. But who we are and what language do we speak cannot be part of this discussion. Not in 2020, Europe, it's 21st century. And I think countries should deal with issues other than what the identity of their neighbor is. This is something very internal, this is something very sacred, and who we are, our European future, and our intention to have good relations with all of our neighbors, I think should be fully compatible and complementary goals. I have to say that we talked about European values. We know, of course, very well the Lisbon Treaty, and I think we Europeans, regardless that I am not a citizen of a member state, but we are still Europeans. We all lose when we don't speak up in defense of core European principles. The accession process should be a process of bringing Europe at home, in North Macedonia, in our region. It should not be a process that deals with bilateral issues, that should not really impede or take European accession as a hostage. So we will fully commit to continuing our discussion with Bulgaria. We cannot really negotiate or discuss Macedonian identity, Macedonian language, and hopefully there will be a breakthrough. If there is no breakthrough, we will never give up from the agenda of the Europeanization, hopefully with the help of the accession process, which is a reform tool. But if we have to, we will call upon friendly member states to help us to focus on the key reform areas and to make progress so that we are in good shape when circumstances change.
Thanks a lot, Nikola. Thanks a lot for the final words, because unfortunately our short time frame is over. So thanks a lot for making time. All the best with your work in the next weeks.
Warm regards from Skopje to you and to the audience.
Thank you, and see you soon personally in Prague. Goodbye. Thanks a lot. I wish you a nice rest of the evening, and I give back the word to Katka Etrichová.